Hello students, this is Professor Chalai, and in this video we're going to go over some of the things that you need to know for the vinegar titration lab. And just as a reminder, this is a 2-week lab, right? So we're going to go over the things that you need to know for the next 2 weeks of lab. And the ultimate aim for this lab is to find the concentration of acetic acid in vinegar. Right? Acetic acid here is CH3COOH. So that's the ultimate aim of this 2 weeks lab. And the way that this lab is broken down is in week 1, your aim will be to find a concentration of some unknown NaOH solution. That's going to be the base. And then in week 2, we're going to use that same NaOH to find a concentration of acetic acid. So that's how we're breaking this down. Now, both of these, in both week 1 and week 2, we're essentially doing an acid-base titration. So let's sort of write that down. So let's focus on week 1. It's going to be an acid-base titration between your NaOH, which is unknown, and some solid KHP. And you're going to use around 0.5 grams of KHP, from which you can calculate the moles used in your acid-base reaction to find your concentration of this unknown NaOH. Now, you're going to have 4 different stock solutions of NaOH to choose from. They're going to be labeled A, B, C, or D. However, you will be assigned one of these 4, and whichever one you get assigned to, you have to stick with that letter for both weeks of the lab because they're all slightly different concentrations. So in week 1, you're going to do this titration. Now the difference of this lab from other labs that you may have done acid-base titration is we're not going to use an indicator to tell us the equivalence point of this acid-base titration. Instead, you're going to be using a titration curve. So you're going to have to create a titration curve for each of your titrations, where on the y-axis we know is pH, and on the x-axis is volume of NaOH that you add. And as you add NaOH, you'll collect your data points and eventually create a nice titration curve. And the way that this is going to tell us the endpoint is the equivalence point right here will give us the volume of NaOH that we needed to reach that equivalence point. So we're not going to use an indicator, we're going to use a titration curve, and the benefits of this is in case you shoot past the equivalence point, you can go back and you look at your graph exactly to find that endpoint. Okay, so you're going to do 4 titration curves each week, right? The first one, there we go, titration curves, I can't spell. The first one is always going to be a rough trial, and then 3 very smooth titrations. Notice that in this region here, the pH changes really quickly for a little bit of NaOH added, so you have to go really, really slowly in this region. The region out here and up here, you can go much faster, but in the sort of equivalence point region, you have to go really, really slowly. The other thing that you need to know is your NaOH is going to be in the burette, right? So here's your burette. This is one of the rare times that you're going to have to fill NaOH to your 0.00 milliliter line. And the reason for that is as you drop your NaOH down into your acid to do this titration, so in here will be your acid. In week 1, that acid is KHP. In week 2, that acid would be the acetic acid in vinegar. Up here is your NaOH. The line on your burette should directly correspond to the volume of NaOH added because you're starting at 0, right? So you're starting at 0 and you'll get a concentration, sorry, a pH of the acid solution. And if you add, let's say, 2.00 mils of NaOH, then the new dot should be at 2.00 mils of NaOH added. And that way you don't need to do final minus initial if you're starting at 0, because you're going to have a lot of points along this curve. So you don't want to do that calculation of final minus initial each time, so just start at 0. So that's the gist of it. In week 1, you're going to be using as your acid around 0.5 grams of KHP, and of course dissolve that in water. And then in week 2, you're going to be using your vinegar as your acid. Right? In both cases, you're going to use the same stock bottle of either A, B, C, or D NaOH. And that's the gist of the lab. Remember that you're going to be using a pH sensor, so make sure you calibrate your pH sensor with the appropriate buffer solutions. And for all of the waste in this lab, it's all either acetic acid, vinegar, KHP. Each of these could be washed down in the sink with running water, so there's no difficulties there. The other thing that I wanted you to know is whenever you're making your titration curve for both weeks, make sure you have a nice smooth curve and you have the full sort of S shape. So I see some students stop the curve there. No, don't do that. Make sure you get a nice completed like S shape until it's been flat for a little while. You want the full S shape of your titration curve and to be able to pick sort of the vertical region, the midpoint of this vertical region to give you your endpoint for your titration. All right, I will see you all in lab.